Hello and welcome. Thank you for watching or listening to the Macon Atlanta podcast, where we are talking about big questions, bold ideas, and better living with inspiring Atlantans. Our guest today is Natalie Gallagher, a professional educator who serves her clients as a communications trainer, facilitator, and public speaking coach to help them resolve core problems and reach common goals. The focus of her work is with public health leaders, teams, and subject matter experts, and her most consistent client is the Center for Disease Control. She's also served as a lead speaker coach and a creator for TEDx Atlanta, and has coached several professionals in developing their TED Talks. She put me through a fear-based exercise during the podcast that was uncomfortable but helpful. And we covered common pitfalls and communication styles and strategies that we can all use to better get through to people during difficult conversations, whether that's in our professional or our personal lives. I learned a ton from this. Felt like I went to class. So Natalie, thank you for that. Thank you all for listening. Without further ado, please enjoy the episode with Natalie Gallagher. Natalie, thank you for being here today. Appreciate you spending time. We talked about you being a TEDx coach for speakers in Atlanta. I'm curious what separates a good and a bad TED Talk, and can you tell us about the best one that you've seen?
Okay. This was a few years ago. I haven't done this in 2 or 3 years, but now I do it somewhat professionally. My favorite TED Talk ever is by a guy named Sean Achor. It's technically a TEDx talk. He did, I think it's TEDx Bloomington 10, 11 years ago. He wrote a book called The Happiness Advantage. And Sean Achor is a positive psychologist who teaches Harvard's famed class on happiness. And all of his research centers around how when you feel good, you actually operate better. You improve your critical thinking skills. You become a better communicator, a better problem solver. You're more creative, all when you're in this happy, light, free mindset. And so I use this TED Talk. It's actually one of their most viewed. I use it with my clients all the time because you've probably noticed, Brent, that we're in this weird place societally where everybody feels bad a lot.
Yeah.
But the only way we get out of feeling that way is by taking action. And the only way we get to action that actually makes a difference, that makes sense, that's on the right track, is to feel good. It's like this weird circular thing. So you start with these small habits that he talks about where you improve your mental state. And from there, you're actually improving your ability to think critically. Your ability to solve problems improves. And then you start working your way out of those bad feelings. So in alignment with that, what makes a great TED Talk is when the presenter gives you a clear, tangible, easy to understand solution to what might feel like an overwhelming or insurmountable problem. And they typically have anywhere from only 6 to 18 minutes to do so. So you have to be clear, you have to be concise, and you have to know what the heck you're talking about to be able to achieve that effectively.
Got it. So one, on the subject matter of that conversation, one thing I often feel now is like the market economy, especially in this tech age where we're inundated with things, is always telling us what we're not. And just the one small shift or that would lead to happiness or increased productivity, or LinkedIn is serving you the promotion that your friends got that you haven't gotten yet. And it's like, if I were doing more. So that need to actually like be happy and be in a calm state and enjoying yourself to actually be more effective. Totally feel that. And then on the TED conversation piece, like you've worked with folks who are giving these conversations. What do you typically see people struggling with? And like, what are you coaching them on to help take them to the next level?
Subject matter experts frequently forget what it's like to be a novice or what it's like to not understand the concept. And so I spend a lot of time working with these professionals. They're the best in their field. And I joke around that I'm helping them translate to a lay audience. And by the way, this is what I do outside of the TED realm. I do this with my public health clients. I actually work with a number of researchers, academic researchers, who are studying anything from the opioids epidemic to firearms. How do you present your findings and your ideas in a clear, concise, accessible way? Because experts typically want to give you like, here's the whole history of the problem. I'm going to use the most dense jargon imaginable. I'm going to talk about this in a very academic, hard to understand way because I think it makes me sound more of an expert.
Yeah.
But in reality, if you want to get people on board with your ideas, you have to be able to articulate it very simply. And that's what I help them do.
Yeah. And what's the gap? Is it because they are experts? Is it because they're trying to sound smart? Is it because people haven't been properly trained?
All of the above.
Okay.
And frequently, like with my academic clients, academics get used to talking to other academics. They go to all these conferences or they're lecturing at their universities. And so they get used to speaking in a certain way, knowing that their audience is probably going to understand them, right? But what I point out to them is if you want to make a difference with people outside of those circles, you have to speak to that audience instead, which means you have to learn how to really strip out all of the extraneous words, all of the dense language that keeps you separated from your audience in order to make a change. Yeah. And so the big question I always have for them is it the research that's most important or what the research can do for people who are experiencing these problems that's most important? And if it's the people, if it's the human beings being represented by the data, then you know what you have to do. We have to shift how we speak to everyone in order to make changes.
Yeah. And can you tell us about the work that you do for the CDC and who are you translating those findings for? Like, is it for other folks in academia? Is it for the average person from the public? Like, what's the level? And then what are you working with, groups on doing?
All right. It's a complex answer, and I'm going to try to answer as simply as possible. Follow my own advice here.
Say that's yes. on brand.
All right. One of the main things that the CDC does is they grant money to researchers all around the country to study the biggest problems facing us in public health, right? Sure. And I'll use opioids, for example. The CDC gets money from the federal government and they disperse it to researchers to figure out how to resolve or at least, improve what is a terrible health crisis, which is opioids in America. Those researchers have to present their findings back to the CDC. Now, they have to be able to describe how they developed their study, what they're hoping to find out, and anything that they've learned already. And they typically only have 10 to 12 minutes to do so. The CDC hosts what are called reverse site visits, where they have all the researchers come in here to Atlanta and they present over like a 2-day conference. And because it's typically 18 to 22 researchers over only 2 days, they've got to move very quickly.
And who are they presenting to?
They're presenting to high-level members of the CDC. They're presenting to the other researchers, so their colleagues, so that way they can start sharing ideas. And when they're presenting to members of the CDC takes that information and they decide how they can influence policy. They decide where to fund the next projects. They make big decisions on how they speak to Congress about where that money should be going. So the stakes are very high. And you can't go into a situation like that and speak for an hour in really dense language.
Sure.
Even the most savvy academic is going to get bored out of their minds, especially if it's 2 full days. Because
by number 16, you're like, okay.
Yeah, you're like, oh my God, get me out of here. Because they're still human beings, right? Sure. And frequently what happens is if you are speaking for an hour like that, you're not answering the right questions. So I help develop the questions. I work with the CDC, the people giving the money. What do you need to know from these researchers? And I coach those grantees on how to answer those questions effectively.
You're on both sides of
I'm on both sides. I am the translator. I am the go-between. I help them with their slides. I help them timing their speech. I make sure that their delivery is strong. And this came from, we did a reverse site visit way back in 2019. And some of the researchers worked on their own and some worked with me. And the ones who worked on their own, there was a noticeable difference because they would come in and they'd use 8 minutes to talk about, here's the history of the epidemic. Well, you don't need to talk about that. We already know in this audience.
Yeah, that's why you got funded, right?
Right. And here's 2 minutes of my solution that I'm going to deliver rapid fire before the light's flashing. Well, that's not very helpful. And because the stakes are high, we have to make sure we're communicating in such a way that people can then move to action with that information. And so that's what I do. I help them essentially identify the key pieces of information, and I help translate it to people who may end up being a lay audience, right? Like we can't assume your Congress member understands epidemiology or research studies. Like we can assume they're a lay audience, right? They represent the people, but they make the decisions about where that money goes and how it impacts their communities. And so we want them to understand, here's how this research directly benefits your constituents, and here's what we should do next to help the people who vote for you.
Yeah. And how's that going? How's it changing recently? Like, is this moment different than it was 5 years ago?
I can't really speak to that because I'm not a representative of the CDC.
Sure.
And I don't have the actual data in front of me. But I can say that one of the big questions we have now is how do addiction-fueled epidemics post-COVID look, because isolation is a huge driver of addiction, right? And so that's always the fine line we're walking, is making sure that we're keeping people safe and healthy from communicable diseases, but also keeping people safe and healthy in a community, which we know reduces instances of overdose, which those are tough conversations, right? So it's always an interesting, how do I put this? You have to always balance human physiology with human psychology, and sometimes they're at odds with each other, unfortunately.
I'm curious how you got here, and if there's a mix of subject matter expertise on the actual health related topics, or if it's purely kind of coaching, presentation style, succinct communication, and otherwise. Like, what's your superpower and how'd you get there?
Oh, my superpower is I am a teacher. My master's is in education. I come from a long line of teachers. I taught at the university level. I taught public speaking, writing, communications. I moved to Atlanta in 2015, and my dad lives here. My dad is doing this work in the CDC for about 25 years. And way back in 2015, he had a contract with the Georgia Department of Public Health, the state department. And they were looking for someone to come in and give an overview to their leadership on public speaking skills and communication. Because we have lots of subject matter experts who don't necessarily have public speaking skills, which is a totally different set of skills. So I came in, I did an hour-long training. No, it was like 3 hours, actually, now that I think about it. It was like a 3-hour training, a whole workshop with like 50 leaders at the state level. And I loved it. I had such a good time. I got paid, which is, always a good thing.
That helps.
Yeah, that does help. And at the time I'd been looking for other teaching jobs. And then I kind of had this like, well, I didn't know that corporate trainers, which is really what the job title is, I didn't know that existed outside of the corporation.
Sure.
All my experience with corporate trainers, they were in-house and they're usually terrible, right? Have you ever sat through a really bad corporate training?
I will not badmouth any of the corporate trainers that I've worked with. Actually,
that's smart.
I worked at McKinsey that's the longest place that I've been, and they do a really good job.
Okay, good.
Objectively.
Good. But you know what I'm talking about, right?
I do know exactly what you're talking about.
Everybody knows what I'm talking about, right? They get a bad rap. There's a reason for that. Like if you've sat in a training where you were lectured for hours, or where they made you read passages out of a book that you could have easily done in your own time, or if the activities felt very surface level and patronizing.
Yeah.
Well, a lot of corporate trainers mean well, but they don't have a teaching background.
Sure.
So I thought, what if I took my teaching background, which is heavily based in brain science and psychology, and translated that to adult learners, because I know I can learn these other pieces along the way. I am not a public health expert, but I've spent enough time working with public health leaders that I have a pretty firm grasp about how the institution works and what its value is. And for me, that's enough to be able to serve my clients effectively.
Yeah. What was it you mentioned, the 50 leaders that you're working with felt kind of like a magic moment. You knew you're onto something. What was it about public health that was like, oh, okay, this feels like it's it for Natalie?
Anyone who goes into teaching probably has this download that you want to make a difference, right? That's just the way you're wired. You want to feel like you have had an impact, a positive impact on the world. Standing in that room, looking at these leaders who make these big decisions, who communicate these policies, I was like, oh, if I can teach them how to communicate better, and that means that they work together better, it means they solve problems better, it means they communicate with the public better, that's me having an impact. Doing this thing that I love, helping them do what they love, helping other people do amazing things, and then it becomes a ripple effect. So that was my light bulb moment, looking around like, oh yeah, I could do this.
Yeah, it's especially cool to think that they're so deep in a relatively esoteric part of the world, but important to translate. And then if you can help bring that out and make it accessible to people, I can totally see that being really energizing for you.
Yeah, and the people who go into public health, they're wired to do the same. They want to make a difference. They are heavily based in science, medicine, epidemiology, right? Those professions don't necessarily come with like a handbook for strong communication skills, whether it's working on a team or giving a presentation. So if I can come in and help them with that, then we have a really good relationship. It doesn't mean they have to be an expert. It just means they can be more effective.
I'm curious, you mentioned people working on slides, coming up with presentation topics, scripts that have to fit into a certain time frame, be communicated effectively, succinctly. I'm working on preparing for a podcast right now that is, how should we use AI right now?
Ooh.
And I'm curious, how does that fit into this work? Are you using AI at this moment? Are any of your clients, are you advising them to? Like, what does that look like?
AI is currently too unreliable and inconsistent to rely on it. Mm-hmm. And you need look no further than if you do like some Google searches, if that Google search combed Reddit for the answers and people put in those ridiculous answers, have a Google search that's tainted by misinformation.
Sure.
And yes, human brains also are easily tainted by misinformation. However, the human brain at least has the capacity to weigh it out and be like, wait, this might not be accurate. Let me go and do some more research on some credible sources and double verify to make sure this is accurate.
Sure.
I don't use AI. I mean, one, I'm old school, but two, I consider myself a writer. And most writers are deeply offended by this idea that a terrible computer can do our job for us because writing's hard.
Sure.
It's hard and it takes a lot of work and it's valuable.
Yeah, I agree with you on the research, not wanting to hand over the research. But I'm curious even on things like, I've got this opening paragraph. This is my rough script. Mm-hmm. Is it succinct and punchy? Is there another way I could say this? Can you give me 30 different ways I could try it? Mm-hmm. One of those might be an improvement on my opening paragraph in a way that even if I don't use it as a writer, I might use it as an editor or a second brain or a prosthesis for thinking is a phrase that I like. Do you agree? Do you disagree?
No, I agree. And I told you earlier that my husband's a website developer. He does a lot of e-commerce. And he realized that he can use AI to kind of monitor the tone of his emails with his clients. He can use AI to monitor the tone of marketing materials because he'll write it the way he perceives it. I'll look at it and I'm like, well, that sounds very aggressive, And AI will go through and say, hey, this sounds very negative. And so he can make those changes. So in that regard, like, it'd be unrealistic to expect a website developer to spend a lot of time learning how to be a strong writer.
Yeah.
He doesn't need to, in which case AI, perfect. For me, though, because this is my wheelhouse, I almost feel like if you're a baseball player and you're a pitcher, it's sort of like outsourcing the pitching duties to one of those automatic ball things that they use during practice where it just shoots the ball at the batter. Like, well, what are you here for then?
Yeah.
There's already a machine that can do this perfectly.
Totally. And so do you think, here we are in summer, fall 2024, like, is there a role at all in the presentation prep for all of those researchers who are coming back to the CDC, or will there be soon?
I think in terms of the slide development, absolutely. In fact, right now, Microsoft PowerPoint has an AI designer in those slides that you can use, that I use to make them look beautiful. Saves me a ton of time. However, can the AI, determine hierarchy in the information? No, it doesn't have the power to do that. Can the AI find the exact right image? No, you put in public health and immediately shows you pictures of people. It shows lots of pictures of like surgery centers. That's not what public health is, though. So there's a lot of room for growth. However, I do think the people I work with can utilize it as a tool to augment what they're already working on.
Yeah, got it. That makes total sense.
Yeah.
I'm curious kind of generally in this moment that we find ourselves, what are you excited about and maybe worried about as you think about the realm of public health communication and some of the work that you're doing?
I am excited by how many people have a vested interest in making it better. And really, anytime you start to feel overwhelmed about the state of the world, by the way, I'm a huge history buff. I have a degree in history. And I look back, I'm like, this is how it's always been. It's always been chaotic and weird and unprecedented. That's the point. Like, we're always doing new things for the first time ever, which is scary and overwhelming. I have a 92-year-old grandmother, and anytime millennials are like, oh, I'm so tired of living in unprecedented situations, she's like, I was born in the midst of the greatest depression in the history of the world, and then I went right into World War II, and then all this other stuff,
Yeah. And when were those precedented times?
Right.
Yeah.
What precedented times, exactly, Anyway, back to my point. When you look at how many people care about making something better, that makes me excited and gives me hope. So my Instagram feed is full of like good news accounts, cats, art, but lots of people who want to do things better. People who are cleaning up the oceans and planting trees and working to help people in underserved communities, get access to healthcare and doing all of these amazing things that don't get as much attention as the negative stuff.
Yeah.
But there's always the helpers. There's always people who care, and there's always people working to make a difference that aren't very visible, but they're there.
Yeah.
And that's what gives me hope, makes me excited.
Totally. And at the beginning, you talked about kind of that happiness wavelength that we can be on. Is that a conscious practice of making sure your Instagram is a place that fosters that for you? And if so, like, what are some of the other practices that you have and habits that you have that help you stay in that happy place where you can do better work?
So yes, absolutely. Remember, so my brain is my biggest asset, which means I treat my brain the way athletes treat their bodies. I have to take good care of it. I prioritize getting sleep. I surround myself with positive people. And my friends who are on the more curmudgeonly side, if you will, we at least have really good discussions. And there's a lot of value that they bring to those relationships. And I joke around because one of my best friends is kind of a pessimist. I'm like, oh, here we go, But we're able to have like amazing conversations about these issues that we both leave feeling better. So I do that. I cultivate friendships. I stopped posting on social media altogether 4 years ago. I have not done a single social media post in 4 years. And in that time, my business has blossomed. I started a book club in 2019 that is thriving. The women in that club are some of my best friends ever, and we've become a very social, tight-knit group. I read a lot more, like books, a lot more fiction. I walk a lot more. I have much better relationships with my family members because instead of posting passively and hoping they comment and like, I just text them.
Sure.
So
are you still consuming social media?
Yeah. But just Instagram.
Okay.
Yeah. I have a Facebook that I rarely check. Instagram, but I look at Instagram for I'm a big football fan. So it's like, here's my football update. Here's my art, my cats, my positive stuff, my happy news. And then I put the Instagram away and I do these other things.
Sure.
So I do all these things to make sure that my brain is always working in an optimal state, because when I feel good, I make better decisions. I'm a better communicator. I connect better with my clients and they can feel that energy. So I work with some people who are overwhelmed and stressed out, and I want to go into the room and be a happy, vibrant presence. Not toxic positivity. I'm never like, just be happy. Instead it's like, well, let's look at this, or let's focus on this, or let's consider this. And that's how we start moving the needle forward.
Yeah. I perceive that to be oddly countercultural. Like you would think, I've never heard anyone say what you just said around, I treat my brain how an athlete treats their body. But it's like, how many knowledge workers are out there? That's kind of true for all of us.
Yeah.
Why is that countercultural? And then also, I perceive in the public health space, especially maybe, there's so much fear and confusion that goes into the discourse around things like vaccines or otherwise. Like, how do we get around that?
The counterculture or the fear and confusion?
Let's go one at a time.
All right, let's start with the counterculture. Because treating your brain the way an athlete treats their body is difficult, right? And by the way, how many normal people treat their body the way athletes do?
Sure.
My husband used to be a snowboarder back in the day. And even now, he goes to the gym multiple times a week. He eats really healthy. He has all these things for managing pain because he fell a whole lot, back in his 20s. And so he spends a lot of time making sure that his nutrition is managed, that all of these things, once you're in that athlete mindset, you're always there. And when he stops doing it, it feels bad, but it's difficult. It's time consuming. The same goes for our brain. So you get home and you're tired, which is easier? Turn on the TV and lay on the couch or read a book.
Sure.
Book is hard. It is. And I'm not saying I don't watch TV because I definitely love TV, but I watch TV more actively. So we'll watch a show and then we'll talk about it. What do we think about how these characters behaved? What do we like about the story? What do we wish the writers had done differently? And we have to be in the right mindset. All of those things means that we're always developing our brain as a tool and an asset. Anybody can do it. It takes discipline.
Yeah.
And that's the hard part.
Yeah, totally. What about the fear and confusion side?
Oh man, the fear and confusion, that could be a whole podcast episode on its own. All right.
Yeah, nothing but time.
Nothing but time. Okay. You take the average person who is feeling bad, can be anger, can be sadness. The root emotion is almost always fear. When you start peeling back all the layers, you get down to fear. And it's typically fear that's connected to something deeply biological. Fear of a lack of resources. I'm afraid there won't be enough for me. Fear for safety. Fear that you won't get the love that you want. All human beings want to be loved. A lot of our fear stems from people won't like me. If they don't like me, they won't love me. And all of that drives it, right? So when we start having conversations about getting people to change behaviors, if you don't understand what their fear is, no solution is effective. You have to keep asking questions till you get down to the root of the problem. And that is very difficult for people because it's much easier to say, just be happy or just do this or stop being an idiot. That's my favorite. Don't be an idiot. Okay, I'll just say thanks or I'll just turn that off.
Turn my idiot dial down.
Right, right. But when you start asking questions, say, oh, well, there's a legitimate fear here. Now let's start figuring out how to address that. What do we need to talk about to address that fear to get this person to start thinking differently about this situation? And you can apply it to anything that Americans are facing or any human being, really. All fear-based. Once you identify the correct fear, then you can start having the right conversation. The problem is you have to go way down to get there. Most people want to stop here. Just do this, just be this, just think that. Problem solved.
Sure. What can you flesh out an example for me?
Sure.
So what's an example kind of root fear that might be presenting in a more surface level way? And then we can kind of work through some of those questions that might unearth it.
Yeah. All right. You mentioned the vaccine thing earlier, right? And this makes sense. So the University of Michigan's Public Health Training Center did some studies a few years ago about vaccine hesitancy. What's going on there and how to best address it. And the typical tactic, which is say those people are idiots, you might be surprised to find does not work. Shaming them. Yeah. And consider this, let's say you just told me you're terrified of spiders. And then I'm like, Brent, you moron. Spiders are so healthy for the ecology, for the environment. How dare you, idiot? Do you feel better about spiders?
No. I'm just resenting you.
You're just now I'm really going to hate spiders, right?
Yeah, sure.
I'm going to double down because this belief is now a core part of my identity. So you develop a belief, a core belief becomes in your mind true. That's your identity now. My identity is I'm terrified of spiders. You telling me I'm an idiot for it doesn't change that belief or my identity. All you're doing is threatening my identity. But if we come down and say, hey, let's unpack this fear. You can do it with vaccines, spiders, whatever. And you get down to that root, you find that people have different fears related to the same thing. So let's go to the vaccines. I am curious, Brent, what are you afraid of? Tell me what you're concerned about. And you're going to get 100 different answers. So-and-so said this study said that. The root cause
So-and-so's grandma.
So-and-so's grandma.
Can't walk now.
Right.
Sure.
Right. And there's certainly critical thinking breakdowns, mistaking causation for correlation and vice versa, right? But the root fear is typically around the fact that we have a stunningly new technology that can do big things that people don't fully understand yet. And that's valid, right? Now, that fear manifests differently in different communities. So here's a really concrete example. When pharmaceuticals first rolled out OxyContin and fentanyl, they touted it as a miracle drug that erases all your pain and it's not even a little bit addictive. And that belief system or that messaging wreaked havoc on communities. There's not a community in this country that has not been touched by the opioids epidemic, right? However, rural communities disproportionately affected. It just decimated them because they didn't have the resources. Now, that was the medical community back then, backed up by Big Pharma. Medical professionals come and say, hey, we just whipped up this vaccine in a very short amount of time. Trust us. We trusted you here and it screwed us bad. Why should we trust you now? Especially when these other people that we do trust are saying that we shouldn't. That's fear, and it's valid. And until we understand that and start changing the way we talk about it, that fear persists.
Do you think people were making that connection, or it's more they feel that in their gut? I feel this sense of unease and insecurity because it feels like I've been lied to before, so why do I trust now? Or was it a direct linkage?
Yeah. Okay. So here's in science, right? We always find out new things as we progress. And here's the truth. This world is incredibly complex. We actually don't know much about it. But scientists will come and say, I'm very confident that this is what I know about this thing because I've done all these studies, they've been, replicated, whatever. Science evolves. We learn new things. We frequently learn things that invalidate the previous things that we thought we knew. That's the way the world works. However, if you have people who have a very concrete conception of how the world works, and you say, yeah, we already told you it was like this, but now we're now saying it's like this, that immediately creates distrust. So that gut instinct, I think I've been lied to before, or I think they're lying to me now, is a valid response. And it doesn't negate the scientific process, which is we're always striving to understand things on a different level. We're learning new things, right? But it does make it much harder to communicate to someone who's not a scientist that this is the way it works. And here's a great example. Like when COVID first started hitting the United States, March 2020, we were getting mixed messaging on masking because we didn't have enough information about how the disease spread. Sure. That mixed messaging immediately creates distrust. Wait, first you said we don't need to wear masks. Now you're saying we do need to wear them. First you're saying it can just be like a cotton head rag. And now you're saying it's got to be an N95. Like what is happening? Like that inconsistent messaging, even if it's valid, because that's the way science works and that's the way the world works, and we're always learning new things, even if it's valid, it messes with your identity, and that's scary, and that means that we don't feel like we can trust the people telling us these things.
Yeah, totally. And you mentioned whether it's vaccines or fear of spiders, at the root is a deeper fear, death, pain, being unloved. And then you alluded to questions being the way that you gradually peel that back. Like, how does that play out? And can you give us an example there?
Yeah. Are you feeling like really bold and open right now? Like if I were to ask you about one of your legitimate fears, do you feel like you'd be willing to?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, Brent,
let's go out there.
What is a fear that you have?
I fear that if I do this podcast and put it out there and nobody listens to it, then like if I try, I'll be exposed as not worth listening to.
Ooh, okay. Hey, I'm curious.
I can feel my face flushing as I say it. There you go.
Which is a very valid feeling for anyone who's put something out. Like right now, my fear is like, oh my God, did I say something dumb or inaccurate? Like, okay, so let's unpack that. I am curious, have you had any previous experiences where you put out something that you created and it was not well received?
Yes. I started a company called Primer Sports in 2015. We did sports email newsletters for busy people. We hoped to be the skim for sports, and it was just fine. Some people really liked it. Wasn't growing fast enough to really go. And we were like, hey, would you pay $5 a month for this if it were going to go away? And people were like, nope. And we were like, all right, it's going away. And then it went away. So there you go.
Yeah. That's a valid fear, right? Now, does that mean it's always going to be that way? No, you're learning new things. Are you the same person that you were in 2015?
I hope not.
I hope not. Yeah. Ideally, we're growing and changing, right? What are some things that you're doing differently this time with this project from what you did in 2015?
We've got a team helping me on post-production and social media. I know that social media can kind of be a time suck for me and a place that preys on my psychology a little bit. And I'm kind of like a little bit looser on the grip on how it performs. And then another big thing is like, this is not tied to monetization at all for me. So like my family eating or my paycheck does not depend on whether 100 or 1,000 people watch this episode or 10,000 or 0.
Your fear about being, it sounds like to me, and let me know if this is off track, that the fear back then was one, that your thoughts and contributions weren't valid. combined with, was it tied to you needing to make money off this project?
Yeah, definitely. It was a company. I was very out there asking people to subscribe, all that.
I mean, you just hit all the fears: emotional fears of not being loved, physical fears, I'm not going to be able to pay to eat and keep a roof over my head, right?
Some of my friends were like going into private equity while I was like a failing sports journalist at the same time. I was like, it's all happening in a bad way.
Yeah, it's all falling apart, right?
Yeah.
All fear of lack, fear of being ostracized. Like, all human beings need to feel part of a community, right? Mm-hmm. That's why solitary confinement is the cruelest of all punishments. All human beings need to have their physical needs met. And you can tie all of these things to matching those fears. And so you have to start asking questions. Hey, is this time different? What evidence do you have that this is going to repeat itself? And you can go in a lot of different directions based on what that fear is. But here's a few tips if you're going to do this. I strongly advise using the word curious. Hey, I'm curious about that. It's a very calming word, and it gets people to open up. Once you've asked your question, stop talking. So notice I say, hey, Brent, what's your fear? Shut my mouth, let you talk. And then at no point did I ever invalidate what you were saying. I asked you if things were looking different, but I never said, Brent, that's never going to happen again. Because that invalidates the fear. And then the fear is like, oh, watch me now, you know? Mm-hmm. And so you just keep asking these questions gently and getting them to open up. Like, what is the root cause of this? With vaccines, what we have found for a lot of people, it's, I already have a negative experience with a medical community incident where I was not taken seriously, or I was not diagnosed properly, or I was not given the right information, and I suffered. And now there's this thing that I don't understand the technology. It seems too good to be true, and I'm scared. And the worst thing we can do with our loved ones who are experiencing this kind of fear is say, you're a moron. Yeah. Even though that's quickly easy and maybe it might even feel fun for a brief moment, it's the worst thing you can do. Instead of saying, hey, I'm curious about your experiences that shaped your beliefs, that now make up your identity. You're not asking people to just change their mind about something minor. You're asking them to completely shift their perception of who they are to get on board with this. Yeah. And you only do that through like love, questions, being calm, getting them to open up, which is so much harder than just getting on Facebook and being like, you're an idiot. Yeah. Problem solved.
Yeah. I'm thinking about a specific extended family text message war that I watched. And the wrapper, what I would put on what you're saying is getting curious versus invalidating. And just that getting curious, asking questions rather than just immediately going to trying to discredit the other person where they're coming from.
Yeah.
It feels like a big difference.
One of the researchers that I worked with a few years ago on his presentation for the reverse site visit at the University of Alabama, lives in Alabama, he knew that to go into a culture that is rooted in hundreds of years of firearms ownership and just say, just don't have guns, he would be laughed out of the state. But moreover, people would be deeply offended because he would be going in there and insulting the culture.
Yeah, their way of life.
Right.
Sure.
Instead, he said, I want to help you keep those firearms safely so that your kids and your loved ones are protected. So you maintain this critical part of your culture, but let's look at different ways that we can communicate safety messaging to make sure that your family doesn't experience a tragedy like this family did. And he was specifically studying keeping firearms in houses where there are children present. Yeah. But the way he did it, and it was so beautiful, is he went and he talked to people. Like, what are you doing now? What if we tried this? Would you be open to this? What if we looked at this strategy? And so what he was looking at is, how do we maintain the respect that we have for this culture where owning a firearm has been passed down for generations and is important, and still keep people safe? And you can only do that through curiosity and respect, which is a very tough line to walk in a culture that is becoming increasingly disrespectful. And what's the opposite of curious? Discurious, ignorant? I should know the word. Uninterested, yes. Uninterested and downright hostile.
Yeah. Yeah, that mixed with short attention spans.
Yes.
Yeah, we're kind of entrenched. We're looking for the gotcha soundbite media that's quick, and then we're on to the next one.
Yeah.
I was going to say and ask, where should we be developing these skills? Because when I hear you talk, I feel two things at the same time. One is like a flicker of hope where I'm like, yes, that is the way we bridge the divide in the town square. And I read the book, The Righteous Mind by Jonathan Haidt, Why Good People Disagree on Politics and Religion. And it's like, yeah, I can see a lot of validity in the traditionally conservative take on things and the traditionally liberal and how they kind of want the same thing. They just have a different way of expressing it. And that book meant a lot to me. And then I'm like, but I also see why that doesn't happen in this day and age. So I feel this flicker of hope when you talk, but I also feel like but that's not the way it is. And if anything, things are moving further away from what you're articulating compared to closer. It's like, where should we be learning these skills and how can that happen?
This doesn't happen on a large scale, unfortunately, because there's too many people who have an agenda that is fed through negativity, right? On social media, things that have negative headlines get way more clicks than things that don't. That's why you have all these headlines that are like, blah, blah, blah. Here's why that's a problem. It's my least favorite headline.
Yeah.
I think I saw one that was like, more people are reading books. Here's why that's a problem. I was like, what? Like, oh my goodness, calm down, you know? This happens one-on-one. This happens with you going home to your family and saying, I want to talk differently with you guys, and here's why. Because I think there's actually a lot more that we agree on, and we're letting these places of difference become so enraging that we're moving further apart.
Yeah.
And so we say, I'm going to start with my friend, my family member, my kids. Do you have kids? Mm-hmm. I'm going to teach my kids how to do this. And then we hope it ripples outwards. I'm a huge, huge proponent of small changes making big impacts. And here's this thing. I saw this on Reddit once where someone was like, in time travel stories, the person who went back in time is always deeply concerned with changing one small thing that's going to change everything in the future. But we don't have that mindset going about our daily lives, right? We don't have that mindset that I can make one small change here that's going to have a huge impact on the future. But what if it does?
Yeah.
Maybe you having a conversation with your family members changes just one person's mind, or at least how they communicate. And then that person goes and they have a conversation, and then it just starts to spread.
Yeah. I was going to ask in the lightning round, I have a question that is, what's a habit you see us embracing in modern culture that maybe isn't serving us? How should we shift that? So I would go ahead and ask it now.
Yeah.
Like, what do you think is the small thing that people could change that might have that big impact in their lives? Like, what do you see when you survey the field?
I'm very happy you asked me this. You sent me that question a few days ago, and it was the one I've pondered the most. And right now, we've been leaning into a culture of complaining. Here's an example. I follow some Atlanta-based Instagram accounts, and they'll ask a fun question like, what do you love most about living in Atlanta? And then you look at the comments, and 90% are like, I hate this, I hate that, rah, rah. And I'm like, well, that wasn't the question. And also, if you hate it that much, go somewhere else, which is easy and flippant to say. There's usually deeper reasons why people can or won't do that. The point being, that wasn't the question. The question is, what do you love about this place? When we complain, we cast ourselves in the role of helpless victim, which is fun for a little bit. Everybody complains a little bit. That's fine. But when you can't get out of complaining, you never get into solutions, ever. And then it feels like the whole world is against you. And then your new identity is helpless victim. And guess what? The world offers up plenty of examples to reinforce that new identity that you've put on. To counteract that, every single day that you get up, look for something that's working out well. And people are always like focusing on a big thing, right? I'm not. I have access to clean, fresh water right out of a tap. There are people on this planet today who do not have that. I will never stop being grateful for clean water out of a tap. I am exceptionally fortunate to have that. And so you start there. Brent, what is one marvelous thing that happened to you today?
I have a men's group, which I'm excited about. And my brother joined, which older brother who I'm close to. And I think it's going to be a really special space for us, to your point on doing more things offline. So that's my biggest win of the week.
That's amazing. After this, I want to hear more about that. Okay, that's a big win, right? When you wake up in the morning, are you in a bed?
I'm in a bed.
Good for you. Good job. Do you know that there's a lot of people who don't have access to beds? Now, if you have a bed and if you don't wake up every morning saying, hey, I'm so grateful for this, then you're missing an opportunity, right? Because what's happening is people wake up in our country and they wake up with all these amazing things around them. And then they zero in on that one thing that's just really driving them crazy. And then they let it define their entire day, their week, their month. And by the way, and I've struggled with depression in the past, so this is not me being flippant. You just be happy. This is me saying a big part of working out of that is getting up every day and being like, hey, how cool is it that I'm having a cup of coffee while sitting on my couch? And I have cats. My husband and I have cats. And hey, it's a day that I don't have to clean up a hairball. I'm so grateful that I have a morning without having to deal with the freaking hairball.
Yeah, you know, you created the cat's problem.
Yes, it's the little things, you know. But then it builds. It's like, oh man, like how amazing that I had a reliable car to get me here today. I am so grateful for that because I know not everybody has that. I know I'm experiencing abundance in this world. And then the inevitable question is like, well, what do you tell the people who don't have those things? Start somewhere. I have friends who have worked themselves out of homelessness. I have family members who have worked themselves out of homelessness, and it is brutally hard. And for all of them, it started with like, I got up this morning and I found one thing that I had that I was grateful for. And then you start stringing them together. Yeah,
totally. That deliberate cultivation of gratitude is work. It takes work to do that. I am a week, maybe closer to 2 weeks into a habit that I'm going to say out here because maybe it'll hold me accountable, but that's a keeping a wins journal.
Yeah.
And it's like end of the week, I'm trying to do it on Friday. What were 3 wins? And then I'm going to try to look at the end of the month and look at my then 12 wins, pick out 3 that were the top 3 in the month. And actually, so I had just written that about the men's group and my brother joining. And that's something that we've wanted to do for a while. And now it exists and now we're in it together. And like, that's a win. And so like celebrating that and not being too busy going from thing to thing to thing to forget to look at the little wins and the little victories along the way. And the same can totally be true of gratitude. I appreciated how you're starting at a more foundational level around the fact that we have sustenance, like a lot to be grateful for.
Yeah. Yeah. Like I put on shoes today, my shoes, and they're comfortable. And I feel like, hey, that's a win because I have access to that. And I'm deeply grateful because I recognize that I have some amount of privilege in this world and I'm not going to waste that complaining. I'm just not. And I've got friends who have so much. And then I talk to them. They're like, oh, this happened and that happened. Oh, this and that. And I'm like, yeah, but look at everything you have.
Yeah.
Your life is amazing. Why are you focused on this one thing? So when we talk about using or treating our brains, you know, the way an athlete treats their body, being in that state of radical gratitude is a huge part of it.
Yeah.
And if you're stuck in complaint mode, in helpless victim mode, you are literally shutting down your ability to think critically and solve problems. There's actually an abundance of brain research. My favorite is a book called Brain Rules by John Medina, followed by The Happiness Advantage by Sean Achor. But if you are in that negative state for so long, you're literally decreasing your ability to be creative. You're essentially destroying your cognitive function. It's why like when you're mad or sad, like you can't really do much.
Yeah.
You make bad decisions.
Let's go there. So I want to talk about one thing that always for me takes me off of that wavelength. And that is a difficult, uncomfortable conversation, especially with a loved one. And if for anybody familiar with the Enneagram, both my parents are Enneagram 9s, the peacemaker. So we did not do a lot of like open conflict in my home, and conflict makes me very uncomfortable. So I'm curious if you have ways that you counsel people for how to approach difficult conversations, how to prepare, how to navigate those in ways that end with good outcomes compared to some of the train wrecks or potholes we might step in otherwise.
Yes. I use a framework called Crucial Conversations. So as a communications trainer, I'm not just like making up stuff on the fly. I'm using a developed, well-tested, thoroughly proven method. Crucial Conversations, it's been out for a while. You can get it anywhere you want. It's a book. Crucial Conversations is tools for talking when stakes are high, there's a difference of opinion, and emotions are pretty strong, right? You're angry, The stakes are high. So this isn't like we're just disagreeing about pineapple on pizza. This is like we're disagreeing about something major. And there's a difference of opinion. And you can use this in your marriage. So for anyone listening, you can use it in your marriage. You can use it with friends, family, whatever, at work. You start by recognizing your own role in the situation. And you start with whether or not you need to make amends. Did you say something that you know was probably not great? Do you need to apologize? And you also start with identifying your ideal outcome. And I always ask my clients, now, is your ideal outcome to make your loved one feel like the biggest idiot alive and make them not ever want to talk to you again? No, right?
Surely not. Yes.
I'm like, okay, because your behavior is not really lining up with that. Now, is your ideal outcome to get them totally, on board with your point of view 100%? Probably not going to be realistic. Now, is your ideal outcome a win-win situation where you come up with a compromise or an agreement where you might both have to concede a little bit, but you also get what you both need? If so, that gives us a basis for the conversation. So Crucial Conversations keeps us laser focused on their ideal outcome, and it has to be a win-win situation. And I joke around, I was captain of my high school debate team, right? And so for years,
that fits.
Yeah, for years, I was like, I am going to win. I'm going to make you feel how inadequate you are because I'm so good at debating. And then unsurprisingly, that has a negative impact on personal relationships, right? So then it became, well, do I want to win or do I want to be married? It's a big question, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
Both.
Both. We have to share the victories, Sure. And in a good, healthy marriage, you share the victories.
Oh, yeah. I'm second fiddle. Actually, I'm in the back playing the bass. That's the role.
Yeah.
My wife plays the electric guitar.
There you go. The win-win outcome means you're both walking away recognizing it's you and I versus the conflict, not you and I versus each other. It's us versus the problem, not you versus me. It's a totally different mindset.
What are the ways that if one person realizes that and the other doesn't, how do you get to, hey, remember, it's you and me versus the conflict, not against each other? What are some practical ways that folks can do that?
You do the same curiosity questions. Hey, I'm curious. What is your ideal outcome? I'm curious why this is so important to you. I'm curious about what would happen if we did this instead of this. And you start kind of pulling it apart. Hey, I'm curious. Do you value the relationship the way I do? Are we having a disagreement about something different? Frequently with those tough conversations, it's just like fear. What you thought was the problem isn't it. It's actually something much deeper. All right, when a married couple are having a fight over chore distribution, it isn't about the chores. It's about feeling like equal partners in the relationship, which is a much bigger issue, right? Because if you start to feel like you're not an equal partner or your partner's not equal or you're not getting your needs met, that's a very different conversation than just how come I always load the dishwasher and you don't?
Yeah. What's the balance between calling a spade versus asking a curiosity question, as in, hey, I want to remind us that we're on the same team here, versus asking a curiosity question and then getting towards trying to get to a deeper motivation, almost seems like it might risk irking someone.
Right.
Stop questioning me.
When you go into a conversation and you say we're on the same team, there's some amount of truth in that statement and you might believe it 100%. But if you're already in conflict with the other person and the other person has some negative feelings towards you and the situation, they might not really believe it. So this is one of those where your words and actions aren't always going to line up. And so you have to make the actions come through with questions. So when you say, hey, we're on the same team and I genuinely care about you and your point of view and a healthy outcome, demonstrating that through being curious about their experience and valuing their point of view is how you establish that trust. So it's a difference between me saying, Brent, we're on the same team versus, hey, Brent, I'm really curious about your experiences. I want to understand why you feel this way. One is I'm telling you how to feel. The other is I'm trying to understand how you feel. When we tell people how to feel, what's our natural reaction? I'm shutting down. No, screw you, right? When I say, hey, I'm genuinely curious about your experiences, people tend to lower the guards. And so then once you've explored their experiences, you've explored their path, they start to open up. And then if you say, hey, like, I'm excited about this because it's you and I versus the problem, now they're much more open to receiving that message because you've already demonstrated a genuine interest in what they're feeling and experiencing.
Yeah, totally. Are there places where you think more difficult conversations need to happen, but they're not happening now?
Yes. I think we're actually having lots and lots of difficult conversations right now, but the medium and the method aren't always great. So for instance, as a society, we're having lots of wonderful conversations about the roles of men and women in our society and how we work together. The problem is too many of those conversations are happening either in comment sections of social media posts or podcasts or whatever, or too many of those conversations are happening where it's a one-sided format. So a person gets on stage and says, this is how it should be. And there's no opportunity for discourse there. Or we're having too many of those conversations where it's just like any other situation where it's, I've stated my point of view. There's now 1,000 people yelling at me about that. That's not a conversation. Those conversations happen just like before, one-on-one. They happen in small groups. They happen in communities. They happen in families. It's the world is changing. That's inevitable. And that's how it's always been. Every change is inevitable. That's the deal. How do we navigate this in a way that everybody feels like they're getting what they need? How do we start shifting mindset so people feel happy and safe and free to live their most authentic lives with other people being cool with that?
Yeah.
And it doesn't typically happen in a social media post.
Yeah, totally.
And
comment section's not where something.
Oh my God,
like that
comment sections are where good ideas go to die.
Yeah. Who should be leading the role modeling on what good looks like there? Is that a faith institution? Is it a community org? I mean, I know that it has to happen in a diffused way where it's one-on-one conversations like we talked about. It starts in the home and otherwise. But still, that has to get role modeled and put on someone's agenda before it becomes a way of life. Who is responsible for doing that role modeling and kind of creating that better way agenda, if you will?
Everyone. All right, when you have a culture of complainers, right? The complainers have this mentality, someone else has to fix this for me. I'm upset and uncomfortable and angry. You have to be different to make me happy. What? Why? And then we all disagree on who those people should be as the role models and the leaders of the conversations. Because guess what? They're all human beings too. We all have different points of view. And then we get mad. Why does this person get a platform? So the answer is everyone is in charge of having those conversations. It affects you. It affects me. It affects our relationships with our families, with our spouses, with our friends, our coworkers. It's far too important to just say, I need that, cultural icon / politician / leader to tell me how to think and behave and feel. Instead, it's, Brent, I want to live in a society where we can have these tough conversations and feel safe to do that. So instead of waiting for someone else to figure it out for me, I'm just going to start having those conversations. I'm going to model those conversations. I'm going to have them in my marriage. I'm going to have them with my sibling. I'm going to have them with my parents. Right now, my mom and I have been having amazing conversations about things that happened 20, 30 years ago and how time has given us the ability to look at those events differently. Our perceptions have shifted. We have a deeper understanding. We can make a different kind of peace with each other as a result. All because we had these conversations. I didn't wait for some influencer or thought leader or politician to tell me. I just decided this is what I want my life to look like, and I'm not going to wait for anyone else to do it for me.
Yeah. Can we talk about an Atlanta example of this?
Yeah.
And we can just kind of riff on this off the fly. I think Atlanta is going to have to be a place that leads on reparations if that ever happens. Atlanta, probably the most diverse city in the country, and certainly a history of Black and white leadership. My fear on reparations, if and when it comes to pass, is it will come as a top-down mandate that will end up kind of calcifying divisions rather than bringing people together, even if there's an economic transfer. And so there might be an economic transfer, but not kind of a heart opening and not a true move towards reconciliation, where I would think that if it's done quite well, when it is done well, there will be both an economic transfer and a move towards greater unity, and the realization of something you said earlier is that we're a lot more alike than we are different. So how can we use it to be a bridge builder rather than an underscoring of separation? So I'm curious, when we think about structurally approaching those conversations and difficult conversations, and then having people see one another and understand where they're coming from, like, how might we approach that?
Oh man, that was a huge question.
That was a huge question. We did not prep this at all.
No, this is the biggest question. You gave me no advance notice. All right. Reparations, huge, sticky topic, and I'm not an expert, so I'm not going to wade too deeply into that. However, if we talk about Atlanta being a model for people feeling empowered to make their own communities better, then yes, absolutely. And here's what that looks like, right? Everybody in Atlanta complains about traffic, yeah? And then we get on the roads and people drive like shit. Let's be honest. And I say this as someone, I hate driving, and despite all the sage things I've hopefully said today, I get the worst road rage, right? My husband drives like 90% of the time as a result. So I start with myself. I'm going to be a safe, conscientious driver. When other people behave badly on the roads, I'm not going to take it personally. And then I'm going to start having these conversations with other people who live in Atlanta. Like, hey, you know what? I never use my cell phone when I'm driving. I just don't. The stakes are too high. Texting while driving is as bad as drunk driving. Like that's what the data says. If you're listening to this now and you're texting while driving, you might as well be drunk. That's how bad it is. Put your phone away. You start one person at a time. If we want traffic to be better, then people have to be safer drivers. Get your friends and family to put their cell phones away, but you can't tell them that unless you're doing it too. Make sure people buckle up and actually stop at a stoplight and drive somewhere within the speed limit. I've been on 85 and people are doing like 85 and a 55. And I'm like, good heavens. Be the change you want to see in the world. People complain about trash. Are you volunteering with an organization to pick up trash? What are you doing to make your community a better place? I care a lot about education and animals. And so when I donate to organizations, they're focused on education or animals. If I volunteer, now that I'm no longer doing TED volunteering, it's, I'll volunteer at an animal shelter, or I'll volunteer in an organization that is going to make a community better. So stop complaining, start figuring out what you can do to make your community just a little bit better. If everybody does that, what happens?
Sure.
Yeah. You're doing a podcast. You're bringing in interesting people and talk about these big ideas. Maybe some people will listen to this and they'll say, you know what, I'm going to do something a little bit different. And that person now influences these other people to do something just a little bit different. And before you know it, just like that stone in the water that ripples outwards, you have big changes happening.
Totally. Thank you. We will do reparations on another podcast. I'll send it to you when it comes out.
Please do.
What's something that if somebody's listening to this that you want them to take away and do differently besides not texting?
Besides not texting while driving. That's going to be my soapbox for today. I want people, when they get into that angry, negative, helpless state, to catch themselves. And like, wait, what else could be going on? What is one small thing that I have control over right now that I can change? Here's an example. I started a book club in 2019 because I love to read and I love to talk about books, and I needed good female friendships, and it's thriving. It's worked better than I could have imagined. A couple months ago, me and 3 of my friends from that book club were having tea, and we're talking about a book, and this young woman walks by and she's like, oh, I wish I had someone to talk about books with. And I was like, start a book club. And she looked at me like I was insane. But I was like, no, really. Like, if you want to talk about books with people, there's a number of ways you can do it. I found 2 friends, and the 3 of us each invited other friends, and that's how we got a good group. I think there's 12 of us now, right? Start a book club. If you want better male friendships, start a men's group. My husband was in a men's group. That's why I want to talk more about it, right? If you want better anything, ask yourself, what is one small thing that I can do to get me to that place? rather than just complaining or lamenting, oh, I don't have anyone to talk about books with. Start a book club. There's trash in my neighborhood. Pick it up. I know you didn't put it there, but it's just going to sit there till someone does something about it. So it could be you or it could be someone else.
Yeah, I totally appreciate that. Be the micro change agent towards what you want to see more of, what you want to cultivate in your life.
Yeah. There's too many people who are waiting for someone else to make the change for them. You have full power to make those changes yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. And to me, that even starts with asking a question that you asked earlier, which is, what's your ideal outcome? What do I actually want to see? Okay, well, maybe I feel a little bit lonely. Okay, if I'm surrounded by a group of guys who's helping me edify towards the man that I want to be, then that's an ideal outcome. Okay, how do we act on that towards that?
Yeah, and I'm curious about your men's group, but my husband's men's group, they were attracting lots of men who are looking for fulfilling platonic male relationships based on becoming better professionals, better husbands, better friends, better brothers, sons, whatever, and getting out of old destructive patterns and behaviors. And I was like, I can't be your everything. I can't be your wife and your therapist and your best friend, even though you're my best friend. We joke around, but it's like, you need healthy male relationships, just like I need healthy female relationships. And the only way we're going to do that is by actually going out and doing that.
Yeah. Totally. Healthy masculinity, another episode of this podcast coming for sure. But super important topic.
Very important topic.
Yeah. I read the other day, males are 77% of suicides. Soon it'll be 80%.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah. That
is crazy. If you heard President Trump got shot,
of course, everybody heard that.
not as if you didn't hear. But the moment that you heard, if we'd stopped time and been like, picture who did this.
Right.
I would wager that no one would be like, yeah, I wonder what woman shot him.
Maybe for a second, but that's a whole other episode there. But you're right. It's like anytime you hear that there's a shooting, you immediately have a picture of who that person is. And you're right. It's almost always male. Why is that? These are big conversations we need to have. And the answer is not men are inherently bad, which is where I'm afraid too many of those conversations go. It's men have some growing that they need to do, just like women have been on our own growth path. How do we make sure we do that where men feel safe, included, and respected, and they also feel like they get to live their authentic lives?
Totally. We were at such a nice wrap-up point, and then I took us down that rabbit hole.
You totally did. That's okay.
Yeah. Well, thank you. We've covered a lot of really good ground. Thanks for spending time today. Anything else that you want to get out before we wrap?
You gave me these rapid-fire questions that I was prepping for.
Oh, let's do it.
Let's do it. All right.
Lightning round questions.
Yes.
Your favorite Atlanta meal.
Okay. Food terminals, curry chicken.
Food terminals, just in general, not even a specific food terminal?
There's only 2 locations.
Okay.
Chambly, right there on Buford Highway.
Oh, food terminal is a place.
Yes. You've not eaten at food terminal?
No.
Brent, what?
This is why I asked these questions.
Okay. From here, because we're in Chambly right now, you're going to get on Buford Highway and you're going to see Food Terminal. It's considered one of the best restaurants in Atlanta. It's Malaysian. All right. They're now Michelin recognized.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. They have curry chicken and they put in lots of different dishes. Whatever it is the best curry chicken on the planet. I'm obsessed with it. It's one of my favorite Atlanta meals. Whenever we have out-of-town visitors, we always take them to Food Terminal. Always a hit. Always. All right. So that's my Atlanta meal, followed by pretty much any banana pudding. That's one of my, I did not grow up in the South, but banana pudding is probably my favorite Southern institution.
Okay. See, this question is selfish because now I got the Food Terminal curry chicken restaurant recommendation and I didn't even know it existed before.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
What do you think happens to us when we die?
Oh man. All right. I firmly believe in reincarnation because I've had all these interesting experiences, but I believe that there's also time in between. So afterlife, you get a little break, then reincarnation.
Let's unpack both of those.
Unpack both of those. All right. I've read all these really interesting articles where little kids, like under the age of 5, just randomly talk about their past lives in a very nonchalant way. Like I have a little nephew named Noah and we were just in Oregon for family reunion and he was casually mentioning being a 61-year-old man and we were like, okay. And if you get like, there's all these different forums where people post like, what's the weirdest thing your kid ever said? And it's little kids coming in like, oh, I used to be a mom with 3 kids, then I died in a fire. And you're like, that's creepy and off-putting. But the fact that it happens so often at that age, I'm like, what if they're just remembering their most recent life? Why else would a little kid do that? Or they'll remember like family members who died before they were born, that kind of thing. Or if you've ever like had a deja vu, but you've never been in that place, it's like...
Deja vu is weird.
Yeah.
I'm reading, I'm a long, slow process of reading a book because it has a very small font called The Christian Agnostic.
Yeah.
Actually recommended to me by one of the guys in my men's group.
Oh, nice.
And fast version on the book, it looks at a lot of the precepts of Christianity. Is like, what if this is true generally, but not specifically? And it talks about a concept called a drawer for awaiting further light, where there can just be things that we don't know yet, and that can be okay. And they give example of like the virgin birth. Did that really happen or no? We can put that in the awaiting further light box. And generally, like that concept has been important for me, awaiting further light. There's like a lot of mystery out there, to your point around science and us not really understanding everything yet. I think there's a lot of mystery that maybe we'll uncover in our life, or maybe it'll just be in awaiting further light. But I am not in a position to rule out reincarnation in the slightest.
Yeah. One of my really good friends who's in my book club, she's a physician and she's brilliant. And she told me once, she said, people think doctors know everything there is to know about the human body. But the truth is we know maybe at best 50% of what's going on. And we're always learning new things. And frequently the new things we learn invalidate old things that we thought.
Yeah.
And so how did you phrase it? The drawer full of light?
Awaiting further light.
Awaiting further. I love that.
Yeah. It can be a drawer, it can be a file cabinet, it can be a shelf, but the concept is awaiting further light.
Yeah. We don't know.
Yeah.
This is the information we have here, but there's all this other stuff. Like when physicists realized that molecules behave differently when you pay attention to them, I was like, whoa, that's crazy.
Nuts.
Yeah.
Dark matter is crazy. All right. So you talked to reincarnation. Okay. What about the time between when we go and when we come back?
When my grandfather died in 1986, very suddenly. And when my mom got home from, I forget where it was a few days after he died, she walked into their house and he was sitting in the living room and he was just hanging out there. And she was like, my mom was a very calm person. And she was just like, hey. And he's just like making sure everything's all right. And then he just disappeared. And then years later, when she was getting remarried, I had a dream, a very vivid dream where I walked into that same house, which my grandma had sold years earlier. And he was sitting in this chair wearing a t-shirt that I recognized because I had that t-shirt for a long time. And he just said, I wanted to check in and make sure that the guy that your mom is marrying is a good guy. And I was like, oh yeah, he's great. He's very good for her. And just something about those experiences was like, there has to be something that's happening after we die. And it's not immediate reincarnation. There's time there for this person that we loved and who loved us to come and check in such a way that we knew it was real. It wasn't just a dream. Like, I firmly believe I was being visited. And that means that there's space in between lives.
You really should check this book out.
Totally.
Because it talks about that same concept in the context of the resurrection. And it basically says, anecdotally, the examples which have happened across the world and across time of people having recently dead ancestors visit them, it spikes in the immediate time after death.
Yeah.
And whether that's because of us or because of them or some mystery we don't understand, like that's when it happens.
Yeah.
And what's going on, we don't know. That's why it's on the shelf of awaiting further light.
I will get answers soon. Hospice nurses, they all report that when someone is close to death, they get visited by loved ones who previously died. And it's such a common occurrence that people who are close to death are like, oh, there's my spouse, my sibling, my parent. And the nurse will be like, okay. But they understand what's happening. Like, it's almost like they're being retrieved almost. Crazy, huh?
Yeah, it's pretty nuts. Our last 2 lightning questions were books, which you've already said a couple. Did you have others that you want to mention? Okay.
These are fiction books.
Okay, good. We need some.
I only read a little bit of nonfiction because it can be so overwhelming. All right. Demon Copperhead. I'm sure everybody's heard that one by now.
My wife's read it. I have not.
It's 100% worth it. And if you want to understand the experience of someone that has lived a very different life than you, Demon Copperhead.
Yeah.
Like if you want to have a deeper understanding of people.
Tell us quickly what it is.
Okay. It is a retelling of David Copperfield, but Demon Copperhead takes place in rural America, and it follows the story of a young orphan who experiences addiction and poverty and homelessness and his journey through that. And it's brilliant. Barbara Kingsolver's an amazing writer, worth all the hype. So Demon Copperhead, this is my very light, happy read. This is a romance book called This Summer Will Be Different by Carly Fortune. It takes place on Prince Edward Island in Canada. It makes me want to move to Prince Edward Island just because it sounds so beautiful. There's no like deeper message there I'm trying to impart with this book recommendation, except that it's just a fun love story. And we need those too.
Yeah, it's part of the happiness.
Part of the happiness. Like people tell me, they're like, oh, I love reading, but I only like to read murder mysteries. I'm like, great. Read whatever you want, just as long as you're reading. Stories are so important. Read everything and anything. Just read.
Totally. Rick Rubin talked about when his book came out, he was like, there's no such thing as lowbrow music. It's like, if you like bubblegum pop and that's what stirs you, then you like bubblegum pop. Listen to it.
Yeah. I'm so tired of people like trashing other people's loves and interests. I'm like, why? You want to know something? I like pineapple on pizza. And you know what? I'm the one eating it, so let me enjoy it.
You're bad. You're a moron.
Like, my stepdad's Italian, so we just don't talk about that, you know?
Yeah, totally. Edit this part out before you send it. All right, our very last one. I think we did cover that one. What's a habit that you think we have?
Oh yeah, the complaining culture. Yep.
The complaining folks.
Yeah. Vent for a little bit, get out of your system, move forward.
Yeah, totally. Thanks a ton for spending time. Super interesting.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. That's our show. Natalie, thank you for the time. Thanks for all those habits that you shared and the tips on positive communication. It's clear that Natalie's got just a heart for how things can be better for you and me and all of us. And I think it's worth asking those questions and examining. So Natalie, thanks for your example. As always, if you all have questions or input as to what you want to see on Macon Atlanta, please let us know. And we appreciate all of you. Thank you for journeying with us, and have a great rest of your day and your week.